everybody. Thank you very much for coming to join us on the Ecotricity stage. Has anyone been here before? Yay, thank you. Anybody an Ecotricity customer? Oh my goodness. Brilliant. Thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it. Right, we run these debates because we think they're fun. They're just a way to communicate some of the things that we believe in, some of the ways in which we work. We've got two debates. We've got the one today, the Big Green Chat. John Snow will be on stage in a second to chair this with Joanna Yarrow from IKEA, Lucy Siegel, who writes for The Guardian, is a reporter for The One Show, and Dale Vince, who's the founder of Ecotricity. Tomorrow, if you're around, on the Siam tent, in the blue tent, we have the Young Green Britain debate. We ran this for the first time last year, and people from the ages of between 11 and 16 entered a competition to take to stage, because I felt we should turn everything on its head and give the kids a chance to speak. So hopefully, if there's anyone in the audience who fancies doing this in the future, they're very, very welcome to enter the competition. We usually announce it at the beginning of each year. So without any further ado, as they say, as always, I'm going to introduce you to our chair, John Snow, and our panellists, who are just coming on stage now. So John Snow, please, big round of applause. You can sit wherever you like, John. Joanna Yarrow from IKEA, Head of Sustainability. Anyway, probably on the left. Lucy Siegel from The One Show and writes for The Guardian, environmentalist. And Dale Vince, founder of Ecotricity. Dale, you get to sit there. Okay, John, are you all right if I hand over to you and I'll go down here? Thank you very much.
Yep. So let's begin with the good news. I mean, ozone over the ozone hole over the Antarctic is healing up. It's going to take 50 years for it to heal up across the planet, but it's started. And 6 billion fewer plastic bags appear to have been bought since they brought in the 5p tax. So that's a nice start. And I'm going to start with you, Dale, because both those developments in enabling us to live more green lives are as a result of legislation. So is it an indication that you only make dramatic breakthroughs providing you persuade the state to pass laws to forbid it?
I think that's probably right, actually. I think
that's a bit depressing.
Yeah. I mean, there are a number of us that are motivated to do things without being forced. A lot of people in the audience here today, for example, will be. But I think the really big changes do come when they're forced on people and on companies to change their behaviour, because it's ultimately companies that provide the things that people have that either cause the problem or help it.
See, if, and you have each been introduced, so I haven't introduced you again, but if, Lucy, the government doesn't prevent Hinkley Point being built, that will be a failure.
Well, if it doesn't prevent, if it prevents...
If it doesn't, frankly, block it and get on with something different.
Well, the whole thing is a bit of a nightmare, really, isn't it, with Hinkley? We were just talking before, and it's kind of hard to see what's right with it when you read through the kind of catalogue of disasters. The fact that two kind of prototypes, if you like, have already failed to be built properly elsewhere, the price that's been agreed.
Well, that's not to mention the one in Finland that's 9 years behind.
Yeah, well, that's one of the ones I'm...
One of the one in China has also failed.
Oh, well, 3.
No, there are actually 4 altogether.
Okay, it's getting worse.
2 in China, 1 in Finland, and another one in France.
Okay, it's not looking good. Okay.
It's not looking good.
I mean, it's a project that the city, it was doomed, a decade ago because no one would underwrite it in the city, and they've managed to kind of raise through this bizarre kind of agreement with EDF. Anyway, we'll see where that goes. But back to your point that you made with Dale, I think if you look, there has not been any appetite for green legislation or sustainability legislation forever, really. There still isn't any appetite for it. I think if you look at what's happened with the plastic bag tax, I think it's actually a triumph of public action. So the real change for me came, I've for years, for a decade, spent arguing with plastic industry, Plastic Federation, who said it will actually increase the number of plastic bags if we bring in legislation, because everyone will run out and buy bin bags because they reuse them, which we knew was absolute rubbish. And you know that from talking to people who say, yes, I might use one or two, but I would stop using them altogether. And what happened was, I think, is that wildlife conservationists, people who do beach cleans, litter pickers, actually created that link and demonstrated that link between wildlife and plastic going into the oceans and waterways. And that is when we saw some change. It was this huge kind of surge of activism which created that legislation. Because we live in a sort of democratic society, let's not get into that, where you actually have to create a mandate for legislation by public will. And a lot of the time, for me, that's being done, any green legislation is coming out because of conservation and because of wildlife action.
And it's hard to believe, but here you are representing, well, no, you're representing yourself, of course, Joanna, but you work for IKEA. You don't drive, you ride a bicycle.
Right, that's right.
What drives your green life, and how does it intersect with IKEA, and how green is IKEA?
Good questions. Well, what drives my green life? Not a car. Bum bum, sorry, a bit early in the morning still. Well, I think for me, a lot of this stuff actually is about emotion. And so talking about that link that was finally made between plastic bags and wildlife, who would have thought that actually the Daily Mail could be a catalyst for a change in mainstream thinking about the environment? But I think...
Let's not give them too much credit.
No, okay. I mean, there's just one tinchy-winchy. But, you know, those emotive issues of turtles in plastic bags, I think, was a bit of a turning point. And I grew up in Wood in Sussex, and so I was surrounded by nature.
I wonder if it's the same wood I grew up in.
It was
I
quite
grew up
big,
in a wood in Sussex.
I think we might have bumped into each other, but...
I doubt it. I'm 100 years older.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything. So for me, I think my connection has always been something very emotional, in that for me, living with nature feels very instinctive and very part of my day-to-day life. And so it was a surprise, I think, as much to me as anyone else when I started working at IKEA, having worked in sustainability for 20 years. But for me, the reason that I made that move was that IKEA focuses on how people live day to day. And it's always been a company that looks at people's sort of day-to-day lifestyles and then designs products and services to help them live better. And so they are actually a very green company, being Swedish. And so now that link to looking at how do people live day to day, what are their needs when it comes to energy, water, waste, and healthier living? And then how can we design products and services that make that easy? So like switching to 100% LED lighting, not selling anything else, starting to sell solar panels in our shops. So really making it mainstream. So you don't have to have lived in a forest to have that connection. You can actually incorporate it day to day in your everyday life.
And that's choice editing as well,
Yes.
what they're doing, which is so important.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, of course, you're into choice editing. You're into the choice, offering the choice to consume green energy. Mm-hmm. Let me put you on the spot, because let us imagine for a moment that Hinkley Point is abandoned. What could you seriously offer to fill the 7% gap that, and in the time available, that apparently we need in order to keep our energy running?
Well, far more than 7% from renewables. I think...
when you say that, do you have to have an extra buffer of renewables to make up for the fact the sun doesn't shine, or the waves don't move, or the wind doesn't blow?
We need a couple of things. We need a smart grid so that we control how we use power and when we use it, so it's not simply on demand, all of us at the same time. And we need grid scale and home scale storage to manage that demand. And we need more renewables. Put the two together, though, with technology, making this happen. And we could run the whole country on 100% renewable energy. And for the size of the budget for Hinkley, reputed to be up to £30 billion, we could probably power half the country. We could create a new 50% of our energy from
Over
renewables.
what period of time?
Very quickly, far quicker than Hinkley will ever be built.
For we very exact hacks, very quickly indeed, it's not a very useful answer.
Oh, okay. Easily within the 10 years that Hinkley won't be built in. But we take a big bite out of that target within 5. Depends really on the planning regime. Over the last few years, the coalition government and the Conservatives have made planning much more difficult for wind energy onshore than it ever needed to be or it is for anything else. And if that was reversed, for example, then onshore wind, which is our biggest resource and our most economic, could take off very quickly. We could probably...
one of the things which I noticed the other day happened to be in the Outer Hebrides. I highly recommended anybody who wants to go there. It's a beautiful, brilliant place. But it also blows wind a lot. And there are lots of arrays up there, lots of arrays, but almost everyone you look at, of the 6 turbines, 2 are idle. And then you discover they haven't yet built the superconductor to get the power off the islands. That is completely ludicrous, isn't it?
Yeah, that's slightly mad. I wouldn't have done that.
Then you think of the carbon emissions from making that cable. How long does it take to offset the plumbing that goes into your industry?
Yeah, I don't know about the plumbing, but when it comes to a windmill, it takes between 3 and 6 months of operation to pay back the entire carbon footprint of the windmill in a manufacturer.
How long will the windmill last?
25 years.
Oh, it's a bit irresistible. Now, we're fully open to questions. Anybody who wants to raise any... Oh, my God, somebody's gone mad over here already. Yeah. If we could get... There are lots of microphones around, or at least 2. If you could keep your hand up so that we can get a microphone to you. And then there are 2 hands down here. So attract the microphone is the answer, unless you're barking, in which case, don't.
Right. I just wondered whether anybody here knew the comparative carbon emissions and payback period for the amount of concrete about to be used in Hinkley.
Well, there's an equation. I don't think any of us are actually into pouring concrete or indeed assessing.
I do subscribe. I didn't sign up, but I do get an email once a week from Global Cement Weekly. But I haven't. I never read it, so I don't know.
Right. So I'm just going to tell you what he's saying, because the microphone is... But we're saving carbon on microphone manufacture. But basically what he's saying is about 6 months to pay that lot back. But then what was the added bit?
Well, you also have the nuclear waste to think about.
Well, obviously you have the nuclear waste to think about. And yes, that never seems to be thought about. But here...
Thank you. In Portugal, they have a lot of wind power. And they've never had it on land, and they've never had any resistance whatsoever from the local people. But the difference between Portugal and Britain is that in Portugal, all the local community benefits. There is a deal done with the local authorities so that everybody gets reduced bills. And it seems to me the difference here is the only person who benefits is the landowner, who's usually fantastically rich already. And people really don't like one person benefiting to the detriment of everybody else. But if everybody benefits, I wouldn't mind a windmill. And this thing about the noise, I've seen lots of windmills and I've never ever heard it. I have heard lots of wind in fir trees, and that seems pretty noisy to me. But I wonder, so the question is, why haven't the electricity companies and the people responsible for windmills adopted the same practice in Britain as they have in Portugal?
Dale.
Can I come back to the thing on concrete, please?
Yeah. Just a moment. Let me just finish this answer, and then we'll come back to concrete.
Well, there was an attempt to do that in the last few years. I think the coalition government brought it in, whereby there's a community payment per megawatt installed from wind farms, and it was designed to head off exactly that issue that you described. Personally, I don't think it is such a big issue. I think most people appreciate renewable energy for the job that it does, and can be slightly more altruistic than what you described. But it didn't work. It's been brought in. It's, I think, £3,000 a megawatt in England, £5,000 a megawatt in Scotland, but it hasn't really worked.
I think the important thing to notice as well, I think absolutely good point, and Scandinavia has a very similar model, and it's completely accepted as being a positive component of many communities' everyday life. But even in the UK, with the media coverage we have, it would be easy to assume that there is mainstream opposition to onshore wind energy. There isn't. The significant majority in any poll I've seen support onshore renewables, and then that goes up even more when people have day-to-day experience of living near a wind turbine. So yes, as you say, that experience of, we have all this woo of how ghastly it's going to be to have a wind turbine in our area. But people do, on average, support them nonetheless. And then when they've actually tried living near one and realised that, generally speaking, it does make, for example, little less noise than the wind in the trees, they support them even more. So we shouldn't assume that there is mainstream opposition in the first place. There isn't.
But it's quite difficult because the august journal that you referred to before, which has maybe done well for the plastic bag debate, has kind of stoked this fire, let's face it. I mean, some of the stuff that's been written on wind turbines is absolutely kind of outrageous. But I agree, there is a media bias. I mean, and it has got, in some areas, it is now such a vicious argument. I've had dealings with a reader of mine who lives in Cornwall who's had to fight for a wind turbine, for planning permission for a wind turbine. She has had death threats. It's like one of those arguments that's become so inflamed and so stoked by certain parts of the media that it's now out of hand in some areas.
Concrete.
Yeah.
Go for it, Chap.
Can I respond to the concrete issue?
Yeah.
It's about life cycle analysis. It's not just concrete alone. If you take into account the amount of energy consumed in mining uranium, in disposing of it and building the power station, you've got a huge carbon footprint, bigger than any other form of power source that we know. And you can refer to some consultancy work that was done by a guy called Storm Van Leeuwen, who did an entire life cycle analysis on this. So there's no point in trying to compare carbon footprints of different power sources until you set the boundaries around which you're doing your comparison, whether it be from mining to production to disposal of waste and decommissioning and so forth.
Thank you very much. Of course, one of the things they did was to dress up Hinkley Point for the media and have land cleared and the rest of it. They've got bulldozers out for a couple of weeks to sort of level it. And of course, the scale of the land being required to make this thing is extraordinary. It's very, very big, and might well subscribe to the suggestion you made. Thank you very much.
You include water in that as well, by the way, water consumption in building these things.
Right. I don't want to favour the front row. The microphone's capable of making a 100-yard dash. Yes.
Hi. I was just wondering what Dale's view was really with the recent Dutch auction on offshore wind, the Borssele project that got a price of 72.7, which has really brought the price right down for offshore wind, and it's sort of really, in my opinion, sort of is a game changer. And just wondering sort of what your appetite is on offshore wind.
Could you just, for the uninitiated, just tell us what has happened?
So the Dutch ran a process for offshore wind where the government actually consented the project rather than developers consenting it, and then all of the utilities actually had a bidding war, if you like, to actually the lowest price sort of that could actually build the project would win the project from the government and had consent and basically ready to go. And
so the government said, we're going to build this thing, now you bid to do it.
Exactly, yeah.
Fine.
And 72 euros or pounds?
Euros.
Yeah. That's...
without grid, so the grid's on top.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
These days, that's about £65.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great price, depending on the impact the grid has.
About 85, isn't it? 90.
Yeah. So I'm too hungover to do the maths, John.
You only run a company.
Yeah.
I have to tell the truth.
That's a great price. I mean, if they included the grid, that would be an exceptional price for offshore wind. and it would put it, almost on a par with onshore, and be a great thing. I don't know if it was a particular location that lent itself to a low price or something like that, but offshore Ram Britain isn't coming in anywhere near that price. It's still over £100 a megawatt hour. But that sounds good.
But it is interesting that, as a by the way, it was revealed that every single energy source, whatever, had come down in price in the last 18 months, at the very point in which the Hinkley was going up.
The price of Hinkley?
Yeah, well, and the price of the electricity at the end of it.
That's a moving target.
There's a very fervent hand, but I don't think you're armed with a microphone, right? Who's got the microphone at the moment? Yeah, go for it.
Hi there. I've just got a quick question for John. I was wondering, what do you think is behind the perceived media bias against renewable energy? And if you've ever come up against it in your career, working for, mainstream media in England?
I think there is a bias against it, but I think it's in the what I would say more traditional quarters of the industry. I don't really detect it that much in the. The real problem is lack of coverage, not bent coverage. So I would say that in the electronic media, every facet of it, there's a preparedness to entertain renewables and green energy. But I think, to be honest, here's an explosive thing to suggest that for some organs, there's advertising interests and commercial interests. The electricity companies pay very large quantities of money for promotion of some of their elements. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right that it's a lack of coverage rather than skewed coverage. It drives me insane. I think that, I do a lot of work for the BBC, so it's not an advertising problem, but it is a perception that our viewers are not going to be interested in it. They're not going to understand it, they're not going to like it, and they're not going to be interested in it. So that is what we're kind of consistently up against. And I think
in television, the problem very often is it's very big, and the pictures are very wide and not very intimate. And the problem with television is, in order to connect with the viewer, you need people, and you need something close and intimate.
That's true.
And these great seascapes that are going to be, and the wind farms, once you've seen them, once you've seen one, you've seen them all. You know what I mean?
But there is something in that as well, because now that we're filming more periodically with drones and stuff like that, we can go out with quite a small team and have a drone camera which can go and get all those shots. And actually, we're starting to find we're able to get more stories away because we're getting those aerial shots and stuff which we couldn't do before. And we did a great story on kite power recently. I don't know what you think about kite power. You probably think it's a load of rubbish, but it looked really good. And it was really interesting.
I fear kite power has not yet come through my letterbox. What is it?
It's basically where this method, there's different methods where you have two kites, huge kites. You send one of them up, and it's the winch that generates the power. So as it comes back in, the other one's going out, and they're in incredibly blowy areas. That's not a technical term, I know.
I don't get that vibe from Dale.
It's not giving out, no.
He's running after this kite.
He should be.
Yeah, I have to say, I think it's an interesting idea, and it's a kind of attractive concept. But I don't think, personally, there's a lot of merit in it, a lot of future in it.
But what about if you're sitting at home and you're eating your dinner and you see it on TV and there's a really short, grabby film and it's like a gateway? It introduces you to the idea of renewables.
I've got no problem with that, provided it's not presented as something that it's not, and then disappoints people.
We didn't say it was going to be the next big thing, I think.
You know that the word renewable is quite a boring word.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think green is a more exciting word.
It is a more exciting word.
This is the problem. We're talking actually about branding and about making this thing meaningful to people who live in an age in which communication is through rather different mechanisms than those with which many people have grown up.
But I do think this thing of needing a label is a challenge, because I know... obviously, I think sustainability and green and eco and renewable, all these unsexy words are quite sexy. But I learned really early on, in my early 20s, I was working as a consultant, and I was working a lot on regeneration projects. And so, trotting up to the East End of Manchester, areas in Newcastle where you had sort of third-generation unemployment, with my, slightly posh London voice, plummy accent, and going and talking, and, come on, chaps, let's talk about your carbon footprint. What do you think about sustainability in your neighbourhood? And I got told quite firmly where to go. But, of course, over the next, in these instances, I was committed to be there for a week, put my flak jacket on, hunkered down, and when you actually start talking with people about what you have for breakfast and where it comes from and how much it costs, what your children's opportunities are going to be when they leave school, whether there's somewhere safe in your neighbourhood to hang out in the evening, all these things, of course, that is everyone's day-to-day. That is our bread and butter. And so often, actually, all we're talking about is how do we, in the 21st century, given what we know about the state of the world and stuff, want to live and thrive in a way that gives, more of us a better quality of life in a smarter way. I don't know what the sexy label is for that, but everyone is interested in that stuff. Yeah. Of course they are. And it's just about, I talk about putting a different pair of goggles on and just helping people to see that actually this is what you care about, but it's just coming at it from a different way.
I think that's really important. I mean, Joe and I met, am I allowed to say this? Because we did...
What story is. How drunk we were. Can't remember.
We met doing a TV show, actually, where we were trying to we were both on a mission to make green sexy and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, we did really well on that one,
Yeah,
clearly.
We didn't get commissions, but never mind. But the whole point was that, we were trying to make the terms different, make them more appealing for our peer group, because we were young then, so it was like,
A while ago.
But we've made so many mistakes with communicating this. I have, everybody has. Brands did. If you remember brands, which we now, I think, probably agree that brands are really, really key to activating systemic change, sustainable change. They can reach the places that a lot of, individual campaigns can't. And if you look at the first green things that happened in the past, you had like Tetra Pak did an advert to message that they changed, that they had recycled content in their packaging. And they did it by producing an advert which it showed like the forest burning. It was absolutely apocalyptic. And all it did was make you panic. Like when you saw it on TV, it was the most awful kind of tragic thing, and it was very disempowering for consumers. All they saw was doom and destruction. And we've kind of learned from that. And I think we're at a place now where we're starting to message sustainability, green, whatever you want to call it, companies like IKEA in a really exciting way that has a lot of reach and actually works really well, particularly with millennials. I know everyone hates to be called millennial.
If you go back to where we started, PCBs and fridges, actually it wasn't public opinion that got governments to give up PCBs. It was actual recognition of the science. And I think the sexy...
also, they had an alternative.
Well, and
that was a big thing, John, that they actually had something else, that they had a solution.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is a solution to more or less everything anyway.
True.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And what happens is it gets politicised, and then we get this ridiculous...
But you see, I mean, that is the big point, isn't it? I personally think that climate change is a much sexier thing than renewables. And yet, one begets the other. I mean, one helps to cure the other. But anyway, let's take another question. Yeah, right at the very back. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, panel. What do you think is the likely implication for green and environment policy in the UK with the referendum and move to Brexit and the decision to abolish the government department responsible for environment and climate change?
Dale.
Was the question, what's the likely direction? Is that what you said?
Yes.
No idea. Anything could happen, I think. We were chatting out the back about the current state of affairs. And anything seems possible these days. It's only 4 weeks, I think, since we voted to leave the EU, for example. Theresa May, I have no idea which way she'll move on these issues. But the delay to Hinckley might be a good sign. I've got my fingers and everything else crossed that they'll review that and change their minds come the autumn. But job to know.
I mean, if I could venture an opinion, I think that it is possible that Brexit has detonated the political system to the extent that it has loosened a lot of bricks in all the parties, but it has not yet seen the arising or the consolidation of any alternative. But I would have said that the world is more fertile now. I've just been in America covering Donald Trump, and you feel the same thing there. I mean, oddly enough, there's the same sort of alienation and disconnect and the rest of it. I mean, the problem is it's fertile for both fascism and for the possibility of the coming together of people around various issues and perhaps being able to create change. It's a unique moment. I don't know where it leads. It either leads, as I say, to crypto-fascism, or it leads to the possibility of something entirely new and much more appropriate for our age.
I think that, yeah, it's a strange. No, I agree with all of that. I think it's a strange, petrifying and exciting time. I think that one thing we are seeing is the power of shrill voices and simplistic messages. And as we've been discussing, I think that, you know, ours collectively, it's a challenge to be simplistic because this stuff isn't simple, it's so interlinked. But at the same time, I think what we are seeing is also the power of vocal voices and the recognition that you need to listen. And certainly post-Brexit, that's been the rhetoric, well, the people have spoken, well, some of them did in a certain way. And so I do think there's never been a more important time for us, whatever our collective beliefs, to actually speak firmly and loudly in them, while we have this reshaping and resettling of the way things are.
Agreed, because we've got things that we will have lost, obviously, like our environmental protections that we took for granted, or we will when Article 50 is triggered, or when it is. So things like the Clean Water Act, if it is. Did I not say if? Sorry, if it is. Like the Clean Water Act, that's obviously something that we just completely take for granted now, that we have bathing water that we can bathe in and stuff like that. That would presumably go. What's it going to be replaced with? Pollution laws. You may argue they weren't very good anyway, because Volkswagen still managed to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. So I think Joe is absolutely right that we have to stand up and we have to shout and we have to fight for environmental laws, because obviously we know from experience that they won't be in the mix automatically. I also worry, as John was saying before, it's so science-based. We don't make this up. It's all evidence-based, that we have maybe some people who are now running environment departments who are, what's the term, post-factual? That worries the hell out of me.
Well, Dale, you're very factual. Go for it.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to say something about the Volkswagen scandal, actually. It's a great example of something really good coming from something really bad, because Volkswagen were fined $2 billion in the US for what they did. And the US courts said to them, we don't actually want the money as a fine. We want you to spend it on charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. So they're mandating $1.5 billion be spent in America and $500 million spent in Europe. And Volkswagen have decided that they're turning the whole operation over to electric and hybrid vehicles, and by 2020 they'll be selling millions of them. And they're taking this problem and this fine and rolling with it and transforming themselves, which I think is fantastic.
Very German. Right, the next, I don't know where we are. Yep.
Hi, I was quite interested in the little debate that you were having about language to do with whether green was sexy or whether renewable was sexy. I work for an organization that has done a lot of work on political polarization around green things. It's called Climate Outreach, and it's really remarkable that there's a huge polarization between right and left on climate issue and on green issues. And using words like green just don't work. We've done research that shows that if you use words like heritage and landscape, they tend to work better with people from the centre-right. And I don't understand why no serious effort has been put into, never mind marketing and making it sexy, but actually trying to base the words we use on the real values that people have, because that kind of diffuses the kind of polarization. It's almost like if you're centre-right, and a lot of people are centre-right, it's not just politically right, it's kind of you know, with conservative social values, feel really uncomfortable.
Where we can look at this work?
Pardon?
Do you have a website?
Yes, sure. It's called climateoutreach.org. One word.
Thank you very much. Is there, yeah, you got the mic, so you should use it. Go for it. You've got the hat and the mic.
Yeah, sorry to drag us back to the question of what's sexy again, but one of the things that isn't sexy, it seems, is these supranational trade agreements that are being negotiated, and the power and influence of the carbon lobby to influence what's in them without us seeing the details of what's in them until it's too late. But I wondered, I guess I'm particularly thinking about Jon Snow, what his comment might be about why the press seems to be, or the media has been avoiding him. I mean, they're not very exciting, but they are destined to lock in carbon usage and environmental initiatives. So I'm thinking like TTIP, which is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, CETA, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement with Canada, and the Trans-Pacific Agreement. They all lock in carbon. For example, the agreement with Canada will involve Alberta tar sands oil being sold in the EU. The agreement with the US will involve gas from fracking, which has a really high carbon intensity. So I'm just wondering why that's another non-sexy subject not being covered in the media.
Well, it's a challenge. I mean, TTIP is not about either tea or tipping. And, you know, these are deliberately obscure concepts and very difficult things to untangle and visually represent. I mean, I have no excuse. We are guilty as charged.
Well, I think it's such an interesting point that you make. Thank you. But I always look at like standard media coverage, and I look at what the business editors cover. And I don't want to be unfair to them, but I see the same stories coming up again and again and again as if they're on some sort of cycle. Recycling, if you're lucky. Normally it's like interviewing an entrepreneur that we all know about, or, you know, it's like these, I never see people getting that into trade stories. And I wonder if the time has come, I don't know if you do have on Channel 4, if we need like a, you know, we need a trade editor or correspondent who's specifically dealing with some of these, because these are the biggest issues in the world. You know, it's like, of course we should know about these. I think that we rely a lot, when I work for The Guardian, on infographics and that sort of thing, but I think they only kind of click with a certain reader. Not everyone can take in information from infographics. I'm useless at it. I work in the fashion industry, and I've spent 10 years trying to clean up the fashion supply chain. The fashion and textiles industry creates 10% of all industrial carbon emissions globally. It uses 17% of available water. I mean, it's incredibly huge. And it's just like, oh, that's just fashion. Don't worry about that. I mean, trade agreements are what has fueled the decline in the fashion supply chain to the extent that we had over 1,000 people killed in a single incident in Bangladesh in 2013. And that is a story that we've been able to get out, but through documentary, not through mainstream media.
Well, there is another point to be made, and that is actually that, of course, Brexit has revealed the grim truth that we only had 2 people in the entire Foreign Office who had any experience of trade negotiations at all. So there are no people to negotiate the new trade agreements which have to be built around the consequences of Brexit. But did you want to say anything, Joe?
I'm afraid I'm not very good on trade agreements either. And it's one of those things that you sort of know you should be, and they are so wrapped up in so much... You can't help but feel on the back foot, even as someone who's passionate on the issues. When it comes, it's sort of wrapped up in the sort of...
It's also an extremely
mystique.
Elongated process. I mean, the Canadian negotiations with Europe have been going on for 7.5 years. Yeah. And you just run out of steam. I mean, it is very, very difficult to keep on top of these things. And the answer actually is to use the social network to wake us up. And if you have information, send it to us, get it to us. There's no difficulty in being in touch with people. The difficulty is getting them to do something. Let's get another point here.
This isn't my question. I'm going to ask that afterwards. But I would say that the media
really serves us badly, especially television. I sit through hours of absolute crap on television. And everybody else I know thinks that. You have, in the television, an amazing thing to get information across to people in interesting programs, and you don't use the opportunity. And I think it's a great shame, because media seems to rule our thoughts and our ideas. And shame on the media. But
Channel 4 News is very good. Come on.
well.
It's brilliant. It's got
No,
15 million views.
But before you go any
every night.
No, darling, but before you go any further, I mean, absorbing information is changing very, very, very fast. Yeah. In actual fact, you can find what you want to see if you know how to find it. I mean, BBC 4, for example, there are all sorts of channels, even if you restrict yourself to television, in which you can, Discovery Channel, all sorts of channels where you will find good material. And better still, you will find material online. You can be led to good material.
My question is for Dale. I'm one of his customers, and I wanted to know where we're going with biogas. And I really do think that one of the main human resources that we have on this planet is poo, and we're not making good use of it. You know, I've got a friend down in the Wincanton area who does biodigesters. He's been going to Parliament, he's been giving them talks, the House of Lords, the ordinary Parliament. He's told them all about what biodigesters could do, and so far it's just been ignored. A few councils are taking on biodigesters, but there's gas, there's plenty of resource to go back on the land.
Okay, well, let's get Dale into the fray.
Okay.
Where's your biogas?
All right, thank you. In September, we're launching a new report around green gas, as we prefer to call it. And we've come up with a way to make gas from grass, unexpectedly. We've been studying this for quite a while. We've got 3 projects in planning, and our report itself shows that there's enough marginal farmland in Britain to make all of the gas that is used by all of the homes in Britain, with 2,500 of these green gas mills, creating something like 150,000 jobs, saving the burning of £8 billion worth of gas per year, and in the process creating havens for wildlife. Because the land around each of our green gas mills that we harness to grow grass goes to organic status and becomes wildlife habitats in between the cropping of the grass. And the only byproduct of our mills is a fertilizer that goes back on the land. It's a closed-loop system. And an interesting statistic for you, it takes 1 acre of grassland to make the gas for an average home in Britain.
So is that better than poo?
No. No, this is gas from grass. There is potential to make gas from poo, but it's much more limited in its quantity, you know.
But what is to stop your report becoming action?
We could do with, you know, that old thing, bit of government support. Could do with some media attention. We're looking for a launch partner, actually, John, if you're interested.
We only observe. We don't. But no, I mean, we're going to be interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously. But well, you've heard it here. We'll definitely cover it. But
can I just say
I'd still like to know when the first field will be cut and the first human will be gassing themselves on your product.
But it's a great alternative to fracking as well. I just wanted to mention that we've compared it to fracking in our report, and it stands up incredibly well. I mean, fracking is really short term. You know, the damage done for 7 years worth of gas, and the cost of all of that is just incredible.
Okay, next question. Good question. Thank you.
If you think the media is bad at communicating messages to do with sustainability, try education. That's worse. Yeah. I have direct experience. Unfortunately, I'm a person from the media, but I have direct experience making a programme last year in which I found that the national curriculum has one rather vague line about the teaching of climate change, but 4 or 5 pages, very detailed pages, about how religion should be taught. My question to you guys is, how do you lobby education, which is frightened of the subject, to make sure that climate change is taught as fact?
Well, you picked the one issue that I get so angry about. It's like we've actually gone backwards on this. So a few years ago, you know, we were starting to introduce concepts, particularly around climate change and renewable energy, into the national curriculum, and we've just had this complete rollback. I was talking to teachers earlier on in the year about why that is, and it's across the board. So the teachers from the state school are saying that there's no time in the curriculum. In private schools or schools with grammar school system, they're saying that the kids are so, and the parents are so focused on exams and SATs and all the rest of it that there's no time to put any of this. It's considered an extra. It's absolutely outrageous. It is also a global problem. So we're now seeing, I worked with some architects last year in America, and they are seeing students come through who know so little about sustainable design and architecture that they have to do online teach-ins to try and get them up to speed, because we're losing out to students in Asia who are learning all of this as standard. It's absolutely disgusting. I'm delighted that Ecotricity are running again this year the, what is it called, Young Green Britain Awards, where they mentor, where they take young people and they put them with a mentor from across the environmental spectrum, from conservation through to renewable energy, and they work with that young person throughout the year, because we really, really, really need these educated young people coming through.
Okay.
Just to add to that, I think that meanwhile, the even scarier thing is that we tend to have an assumption that our children are really passionate about this and are being educated on this, and it's fine because they'll sort it out. They're certainly passionate. Yeah. I think in primary school they get the basics, they get the emotional stuff, and then it dissipates. So that by the time they're looking at university or careers, they don't see this. They see this as a primary school subject at best, and not something that's really part of real life.
Yes, ma'am.
Stand up and hold my placard up. On the 24th of May, North Yorkshire County Council voted to allow the first fracking site to take place in Rydale, 5 miles from where I live. After 2 days of, I wasn't there, I was away at the time, but after 2 days of fantastic evidence from scientists, from doctors, from members of the public, from people that live in the area who run very, very successful tourist businesses who are seriously worried about the threat to the tourism industry in Rydale, the council, the planning council, none of whom live in Rydale, North Yorkshire's a huge county, passed permission for fracking to start at this site at Kirby Misperton. The whole of Rydale is given over to licenses to frack, to people like INEOS, who are just raring to go. And I want to know, after all the parish councils, all the town councils, everybody said, no, we don't want fracking, what the hell is happening to our democratic process? And this is really what is at stake here. We've got Andrea Leadsom. We've got Andrea Leadsom now as Minister of the Environment, and she's so pro-fracking. She'll frack the whole country. What are we going to do? How can we save ourselves?
That's a good point. I think the situation for planning for fracking just shows the massive hypocrisy of our last couple of governments, because they've made it harder for renewables step by step. They keep the decision for renewable energy in the hands of district councils, but pushed fracking to county councils, changed environment laws, planning laws, all sorts of stuff to really force it on the public. And somebody earlier said that renewable energy is unpopular. Nothing is as unpopular as fracking, except perhaps nuclear energy. But both of those things are forced on us, so it is just massively undemocratic. We're hoping to do something about that in September. When we launch our report, we're going to follow the fracking industry around the country and put a green gas mill application in wherever there's an application for fracking.
And we're hoping to show people the alternative and get a debate going nationally, but locally, step by step, and try to build a bit of momentum against fracking and for green gas.
Can I just ask you a question? If a community revokes permission, like an entire community revokes permission, as this community seems to have done, is that they can still frack there?
Yeah, that's right.
They can.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid the word nobble comes into one's head. How they're nobbled, I don't know, but there'll be something in it for somebody somewhere. There has to be. There's no other explanation. I feel very guilty about Rydale because you've written to me many times, and I have a folder on Rydale, and I keep drawing my environment correspondents' attention to it. The problem is there are about 50 or 60 other massive campaigns that are also trying to prevent fracking and other attacks on the environment.
It's so siloed, isn't it, with fracking? It's such specific places, and it seems like that's one of they're able to almost divide and conquer you because you're all in one area, and maybe that's why Dale's thing is like... Well, no, I know, but the campaigns are very, very locally specific.
But also the science is muddy in the sense that, you know there are earthquakes, you know that there are problems of all sorts. Yeah. I mean, the Blackpool earthquake, all the rest of it. Yeah. But it's like climate change deniers, Yeah. It's very, very difficult to work on. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going back to something. You were talking about how to brand sustainability, how to brand renewables so it's attractive. But you're also talking about, in this day and age, simple messages are very popular, like Donald Trump, for example. And I was wondering do you believe there's a way, I know renewables are it's complex, you can't dumb it down, but do you reckon there's a way to simplify it and, bring it back down to the fundamentals? Would that communicate to the masses better, do you reckon, now with the popularity of simpler messages?
Well, this is something that I personally grapple with all the time. And at IKEA, we're really looking at how can we engage customers, and just generally, it doesn't matter if they're customers or not, households across the UK, to think about living more sustainably. We racked our brains for months and months on this one, and I don't think we've got the right answer. But obviously in IKEA, we call all our furniture weird names anyway. A Billy bookcase, but everyone knows what you're talking about. So we decided with this initiative, we've got a project at the moment where we've got nearly 250 households around the UK all trying out living in a more sustainable way. And so we actually looked to Sweden for a word because we didn't feel we had one ourselves. And there's a word in Swedish called lagom, which basically means just the right amount. So you think it's 3 bowls of porridge, not too hot, not too cold, just right. If you think of lighting, it's like, it's not a candle, it's not a spotlight, it's an LED. Just the right amount is best. We shouldn't be giving everything up, but we should be finding a way of living that gives us good quality of life in balance. So all these households, as soon as you explain it to them, they all now talk about, the project's called Live Lagom. And they have various things like, oh, that's lagom, that's not lagom. I'm not sure that's going to catch on itself, but that was the thought process that we went through, and we had to go and find another word from somewhere else in the end.
Yeah, when I think about it, there is another word that I think the transition movement is using brilliantly to explain a lot of very complex, maybe not that complex, a shift to sustainable 21st century living, and they just say resilience. So they're building in resilience. So they're using renewables to build in resilience. They are refusing consent for planning via their community, and they seem to be very successful with that. So maybe fracking could kind of team up with them. But they call it resilience. So they're just inherently building a resilient community. And the headline is very simple. I think they use the 9 meals from anarchy. So do you remember like the petrol? God, I don't know even when the petrol thing was. You probably weren't even born. I don't know. It's all like everything. Time has gone so fast for me now. But there was, blockades, or there was problem getting petrol through to different parts of the country, and then they worked out how reliant we were on bringing food in and trucking it all around the country and flying it in, and we're only 9 meals away from not being able to feed ourselves. So then the community started growing locally and trying to source their footprint locally, and it's just being resilient.
Right. Thank you for your patience, sir.
Very much. It's been a very useful discussion so far. I'd like to make a comment first and then a question to the panel. I think what we're seeing in the UK over many, many years is this fragmented policies from the various governments not being continuous. So one government will rescind previous policies in terms of renewable energy. We've seen it with the recent reduction in the feed-in tariff, where it's a very successful scheme is then rescinded by the current government when it should be taken further. If you look at the EU countries, very much more proactive on renewables over the years, mainly because of supportive legislation from their governments over a much longer term period. In this country, we have stop-start processes and legislation. That's the fundamental problem in this country. Also, just looking at some of the technologies we're looking at, you've mentioned anaerobic digestion, wind turbines. There's about 4,000 windmills in this country in the 14th century. So what we're looking at now is nothing new.
So your question is?
The question is really flicking on its head. We're all excited about renewable energy, wind turbines and solar panels, etc., but I think what we should fundamentally be doing is reducing our energy demand down. Good example, making it a bit more personal, my daughter a few years ago came home from school midwinter, didn't know how to switch the heating on, so she sat there in a hat, scarf, gloves, doing a revision. Thumbs up, brilliant, save fuel. And I think I'd be interested to understand from the panel's perspective, specifically Dale, in terms of what your company and IKEA are actually doing in terms of reducing the demand down, because if we reduce our demand down, then we need less energy, and if we need less energy, then the opportunity for the renewables can provide that peak.
Well, you've very, very brilliantly taken us actually to the title of the debate today. How easy is it to be green?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's getting easier, actually, John, just to answer the question directly. But in terms of energy efficiency and renewables, I think they're two sides of the same coin. We do have to use less, and what we do use, we have to make from renewable sources. There's no doubt about it. We're kicking something off again in September. August is a quiet month. We're bringing some LEDs over from China, and we're hoping to disrupt the LED market by putting them out there for £1 each. And because I don't know what IKEA's view on that might be, actually. But So we believe in energy efficiency. As a company, we've been focused on making energy and haven't done much to, on the energy efficiency side.
One thing, and that is how much did the workers get paid to make them so that you could buy them for £1 a piece?
Yeah. Nice question. We are very careful about where we source things from and the conditions, and we've looked into that. So we also have an energy storage device in development, a black box, which is home energy storage, and that's to help people make the most use of solar energy if they have it, and also it's about taking houses on and off the grid in the rush hour. So as well as using less energy, we have to be more particular about when we use it, because we have these big peaks and troughs on the grid, and we have a lot of generation really on standby to meet those peaks. And that's all because we all press the light switch or put the kettle on at the same time of the day, typically. So demand management using technology at a home and a grid scale is also a big part of the issue.
Okay, we've not got much more time, so let's just get a few more questions in. Yeah. Only when I can get a microphone, do you like?
This will be pretty brief because the previous gentleman kind of touched on it, but I was just going to say we started off talking about the importance of legislation. If each panellist could bring in one piece of legislation to force people to consume less, whether it's in homes, in businesses, in office and factories, production, everything from food to transport, just one thing, what would it be?
Okay. Well, I would take away the subsidies for fossil fuels. That's about £1,000 per family per year, so that we all had to pay the real cost of fossil fuels.
I would ban all private cars in large cities in the centres completely. The survey into congestion charging in London revealed that only 15% of the people who drove in central London lived anywhere in London. There is no excuse for cars in central cities. Indeed, if you did it, you'd get a much more efficient public transport system.
Can we just say ours? No, can we just say our point? Can we say anything? Okay, I would bring in a carbon budget, like was talked about 10 years ago, so everyone has a personal carbon budget, and you get a rebate for the negawatt, so the watt of electricity you don't use. So if you're thrifty, you'll be quids in, basically.
I would do the same as Lucy, actually, so she stole that one from me. But I would also introduce tax on aviation fuel so that we're actually able to travel in meaningful ways.
Hello? Sorry, I'm on. Right, I'm an Ecotricity customer, and I welcome what Dale said about the projection of increasing green energy by about 50% in about 10 years, and that's fantastic news. But a lot of people are very worried about the health implications of smart meters, of the microwave radiation, which has caused cancer clusters and fires and misleading readings.
Well, that sounds dangerous.
Yeah, that does sound dangerous. There's no scientific evidence of there being a problem with smart meters and people's health. And I mean, I don't have a phone, but if you use a mobile phone, then you are getting more microwave radiation into your head than you are with a smart meter which is in your cupboard somewhere in your house. And actually, it uses a phone signal. That's all it uses. They use SIM cards. And so I think, personally, I think that's a bit of a red herring. The idea that from a microwave point of view, they're bad for people's health. I don't think there's any evidence of that. And it kind of defies logic to me. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Well, scientific proof. Well,
but
smart.
Smart meters use a phone SIM. So if you use a mobile phone, then you're holding something very much closer to your head than you'll ever get to a smart meter, and you'll do yourself more harm. Sorry, I don't know if he's heckling or just...
Hold on a sec, because several people are speaking at once. Let's get a microphone over to the blue dress on the fence, if we could, Helen, in a minute, when you've got one. Yeah, her. So carry on.
Can I?
Yeah, you come up now. Yeah.
So I spend quite a lot of time. I'm going back to the education and for the consuming questions that come in. So I spend quite a lot of time taking designers and businesses to landfill sites and recovery centres, looking at the amount of waste going through our system, so broadening it out into overconsumption of energy, but into products and stuff. So I wanted to think about how much, and to ask the panel how much, or what they could do from a brand and media perspective about actually just reducing the amount of stuff we consume.
Of course, we're involved in aggressively pushing it the other way, but anyway.
Do you want to go first, Jo?
I will go first, because everyone sitting here is thinking, oh, IKEA, yes. Well, clearly, IKEA, like any other retailer, comes from a history of making stuff, however efficiently, selling it, and then basically saying goodbye. And, I am proud at IKEA that we have extremely stringent sourcing processes, the most stringent in the world, and we founded most of them when it comes to things like cotton and wood. We'll produce more than the amount of energy we use by 2020, 100% renewably, and so on. However, even if you're that clean, if you want to continue to grow as a business and you just take that stuff and efficiently turn it into something and say goodbye, that is not sustainable. So I think that for IKEA and for any stuff-based retailer, the whole idea of the circular economy, of creating things that people can use and reuse time and time again, that can be upgraded, that can be shared, that can be leased, so that actually you maybe never even own the item in the first place, has to be the way of the future. And so that's something that my colleagues and I are working on hard now, and I think we'll see huge changes in the future. And that's as much about engaging with the customer and all of us thinking about the need that we have. So, do I need a washing machine, or do I need to be able to have clean clothes regularly? And then you have quite a different relationship with that item in your home. And we'll need to think about that across everything that we use in our daily lives in order to be much more sustainable than we are today.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call on George V.
Yeah, I hate to start with a gathering like this, with this statement, with all due respect. We've been sitting here for an hour, and we've really been, the majority of the time that we've been here, we've been discussing electricity. Now, if you look at DEC figures, that's the Department for Energy and Climate Change, show that more than 70% of the UK's non-transport energy budget is for heat. And and electricity is a very, very inefficient way of generating heat to heat our homes. Underneath the ground, we have got an infinite, renewable, recyclable source of energy through heat pumps. So basically, if we drill down into the ground, it's much more efficient to drill than it is to dig trenches. We can install heat pumps which can heat and cool our buildings. Now, people think, oh, heat pumps, that's really, really new technology. It's not. It was invented by Lord Kelvin in the 19th century, and we all have heat pumps in our houses. Assume we all have fridges, then we all have a heat pump in our house. So the big disadvantage of heat pumps is that they are expensive for an upfront cost. They're 400% efficient if you're heating, they're 600% efficient if you are cooling. So my question to the panel is, how can we break down the barrier to entry to get widespread use of ground source heat pumps in our heating budget?
Not something you'd like to see.
Oh, no, I'm up for it. I don't think we've only been talking about electricity. We did spend some time talking about gas.
I said the lion's share.
Oh, okay. But we spent some time talking about gas and the possibility of making it from grass and that kind of stuff. You're absolutely right on the numbers. How we heat our homes is very important. Heat pumps are a great thing. I've got one, and they work really well. But they have a limited application for the retrofit market. Not everybody has room for one, that's the problem. Air source heat pumps are more accessible but less efficient, as you know. And so I think they've got a role to play. And the way, to answer your question, the way to make them happen more, the way to support them would be through some form of government support. The renewable heat incentive, I think, is the one that's due for the chop next. But that would be the one that could help.
Thank you very much. Anybody view on heat pumps?
I really like heat pumps too. I'm just going to tie this into a previous question because it seems to me that they're very complicated to fit and get the right size for, and you also have to have the right architecture, and the whole thing has to work in a sort of symbiotic kind of environment, ecosystem. And good luck getting heat pumps off the ground or on the ground or in the ground unless we have brilliant environmentally educated engineers coming through, because it's a intelligent solution that needs to be installed by intelligent people.
Joanna?
I agree. I think that, fantastic in the right location. Obviously, in very densely built urban areas, retrofitting those, I'm not an engineer, but I know it's challenging. But also, it's not, they're not super complicated. Again, not being a physicist, but the Romans were doing this sort of thing with their labyrinths in terms of, passive heat and cooling exchange a long time ago. So, we shouldn't feel like we have to completely reinvent the wheel, of course, with great modern applications. I think the main point is there is no silver bullet. We all would love there to be one solution that we can put all our weight behind to solve this panoply of challenges. That isn't going to happen. And so I think that, we need to embrace diversity and not feel like it's one or the other. And that's a complicated message to get across. But it's very important. It's horses for courses.
Right. I'm afraid we can only take the last two questions, the last two people holding a microphone. One is there and one is there. So I take you, Ms. Blue Dress.
I've been thinking for a long time about the fact that we're not all saints. Some people think green's floaty, some don't. Some people want to be green and don't quite manage it. And in the past, historically, we've always put taxes on anything that we, as a government, they begin to think isn't a good idea, like fuel or cigarettes or something. But that taxes only the poor. And I would like to see carbon rationing cards like they did in the war, so we can choose whether we go on holiday to Australia or drive a car or sit in the house in jumpers. And everybody has one. If we've got technology, why can't we do this? We should be able to do it if they did it in the war.
Thank you very much.
Well, I agree. We should be able to do it, but even the word rationing is just pulling in the wrong direction, isn't it? We spent some time here talking today about the need for positive words to describe the kind of things that we're trying to achieve, and the idea of having rationing just reaffirms the stereotype, really, that green living is about giving stuff up. It's about a life of denial, and that's what we need to break away from, I think.
Sharing is a good idea.
Sharing is a nicer word.
Froome, let's hear it for Froome. Yeah. A microphone here. Last question.
Hello. I just wanted to give the opinion of our under 18, because unless I've completely miscalculated everyone's age, I think I'm the first under 18 to talk. And not quite. We've also talked a lot about the youth and education, and I'm a geography A-level student, and we do a whole topic on energy issues, and not only is a tiny proportion of that about sustainability, but I think the most worrying thing is the core value, teaching of it, is that we can't rely on it. We are taught to write in our exams that we can't rely on sustainability, and as someone who has been interested in sustainability and eco since she was tiny, it really annoys me. And it was just the education issue that I thought you might want the opinion from a young person, that it is awful. And just so that you know, that the people who should be interested, the geography A-level students, who actually learn about it, don't even get taught properly. So I just thought everyone would...
Well, thank you very much. And I guess if we can emerge from this with at least one course of action, and that is if any of us are governors, if any of us are parents, if any of us are grandparents, we should put our shoulders to the wheel and ensure that the schools in which our progenies are resident, or rather at their desks, we should try to ensure that they're being taught properly about environmental issues. I'd like to thank you all very, very warmly for a really attentive and quite sunny operation in talking about very important issues. I'd like to thank Joanna very warmly, Lucy very warmly, and Dale too for Ecotricity's sponsorship of it. Thank you very much. Seriously, you'll forget. But